Welcome friends to another rSlash malicious compliance video. If you're not a malicious soul, make sure to help out by hitting the like and subscribe buttons down below. That said, our first story of the day is by FGZ Clunk. You want to apply non-existent contract penalties and want support? Many years ago, I was a freelance software developer. I identified an opportunity with a local company that needed a custom application developed. I submitted a competitive price to write what they wanted in Visual Basic. I would write the code, and they would develop all the reporting using the package of their choice. Despite the rest of the world using Crystal reports for Visual Basic reporting, they wanted to use a product that they thought they knew. I got awarded the work and sent them a copy of my standard T&Cs, and they sent me a purchase order for the work. My contract specified that there were no penalties for late delivery, but I would provide support for the code for 6 months from delivery. Their purchase order stated penalties, but no support. I made a mistake of not getting signed off requirements before I started working and scope crept, as it always does. They also found that the Windows version of the reporting tool was significantly different to the DOS tool they were familiar with. They decided to seek my advice on what to use instead. Of course, I suggested what the rest of the world offered. Halfway through the project, the managing director of the company changed. The new guy was not as amiable, and when the project finally got delivered, mainly because they kept changing their requirements, he decided to invoke the non-existent contract penalties. I said my contract says no penalties, and he replied his PO had penalties. I was angry and walked out of the meeting without handing over the code. Overnight, I thought about it and returned the following morning to hand over the code as we had agreed. I didn't want to give them an excuse to take me to court. I walked in and handed over the code. We then got to talk about the payment. He wanted to deduct 20% from the full cost. So I pointed out that if he wants to deduct 20% as per his PO, then he wouldn't get any support. He asked me how much it would cost for the support. Being a reasonable person, I said 20% of the original cost. I walked out with my check for the full amount. In case there's not enough malicious compliance in the above, the support terms were that I would get informed of any issues by 5 p.m. Friday. I would then have the weekend to look at the issue and inform them on Monday if it would take more than 14 days to fix the problem. Otherwise, I had to fix all the bugs and return the fixed code 14 days after they were reported. If they missed the 5 p.m. deadline, I would have another week to fix. Invariably, I fixed all the issues the weekend they sent them to me, and then sat on the fixes for 14 days before sending them back. Be honest, if you had 14 days to do something, would you kind of sit on that a little bit and maybe let yourself procrastinate for a while? I'm assuming most of these things did not actually take 2 weeks to properly fix. Let me know if you would in the comments down below. And our next story is by NFIOCOK again. I am not eligible to use the hired cars? Okay. As I read more and more of these stories, I'm reminded of some of the crazy rules of the tech startup companies I have worked at. I was traveling a lot for a startup game company back before Uber was a thing, so if you weren't driving, you used public transportation or a taxi/shuttle service to the airport. I was traveling out of the country every few weeks and had to be at the airport early, so public transportation wasn't an option. My company had a private car and transportation company they used frequently, and I became friends with the owner. I lived about 50 miles from the airport, and he offered to pick me up in the early morning and take me to and from the airport for $45 each way. In San Francisco 2010, this was an insane deal. A week after the first time I used them, I was called in by my leadership stating that the hired cars are only for executives, or else I could pay out of my own pocket and not be reimbursed. I explained that BART, Bay Area train system, didn't run early enough for me to take it, and asked if I could use a taxi. They said no, and I needed to drive myself. I told them that mileage, bridge toll, and parking at the airport would cost a lot more than what the car service was charging. I was usually out of town for at least a week. I was told again that the hired car service was only for executives. Fine, time for some malicious compliance. There was more than one way to the airport, so I made sure to take the long way, adding another 30 miles each way. Airport parking at the time was $20 per day, I believe, maybe a little less. My first trip after my talking to, I was gone for 10 days. Mileage at 51 cents per mile is $82. Bridge toll is $5, parking is $200. This actually went on for a couple more trips before I was asked about the expenses. This was one of the few times they realized their rules were stupid and changed things. My company communicated that they were going to start contracting hired cars for early morning commutes to the airport. Great idea, boss. I had a post before about the same company, and there were a lot of comments about tax implications and proper coding of expenses, etc. Just remember, this was a tech startup growing exponentially. There were no regulations. They weren't public and had no one to answer to at the time. They made the rules based on whose turn it was to grab the microphone and stir stuff up. Back then, there was a lot of malicious compliance going on, and luckily, a lot of it resulted in better policies based on common sense and data. I would definitely imagine a tech startup growing exponentially would be full of brainiacs that kind of just come up with ways to game the system or comply maliciously. So to me, it really comes as no surprise that policies were reformed and rethought and structured in a much better way, because honestly, otherwise, the mega minds that work at this company would tear it apart. This next story is by Monolim. Bank forces me to use his ATM? Okay, sir. So this is a new thing, started this week, very unexpected, and so much better than what I thought it would be. So in these days in my country, most payment of products and services are regularly paid on bank branches with a reference code that's linked to the business account and automatically identifies who's paying. Before COVID, which now seems like a decade ago, people would carry cash, go to the business, and pay their product and service there. But having forced to do it online, by email or by WhatsApp due to COVID, they started issuing payment instructions to pay at the bank or online. But people being people, they like to use cash and they're not very fond of using their electronic bank to make all their payments, and generally don't trust the company's website to pay, due to a high number of card details being stolen and most websites not being very user-friendly. So people will now line up in the bank to make this payment, making huge lines of old and new customers and making the old customers complain about it. My bank started to buy ATMs that would also take money to make payments. Before, you could see one in each branch for 3 of the regular ones. But now they upgraded to 3 of the new ones and 3 of the regular ones to keep up with demand. Up to here, that's fine and was very welcomed. Now on to the problem. A couple of weeks ago, they issued a directive saying from October 15th, no more services payments would be accepted in the branch, but only through the ATMs that take money. Use that or use the company's issuing the payment instructions website, or take your money elsewhere. That for me was a huge problem. I receive from 3 to 10 payments of different companies every day. I'm a middleman in my business, and people like to come to me to hire the company's service and pay me for it, as I'm authorized to do. Me being a good customer of this bank, with my account, credit card, house mortgage with them, it was an issue. Taking my money elsewhere was no easy task. Cue malicious compliance. I talked to my accountant and asked if I could deposit this cash into my own account and pay it with my own credit card without getting into trouble with the IRS. Surprise, surprise, as I have such authorization as the middleman to receive the company's money, as long as I spend exactly what I enter in the account, that's fine. So now I go to the bank, deposit into my account, and pay with my credit card. And yes, I get 0.7% in cash back for all payments done with my credit card. So now I make an extra $100 every month on them. Thank you so much. Don't you love how things can just sometimes align so perfectly that not only do you find a way to make it all work, you actually get paid a little extra on top of it. It's one of those things that at the end of the day, when you're finally lounging, you kick your feet up and you go, man, this is just a really good thing I've got going on. I don't know how lucky I am to end up here. In the weirdest way, COVID actually helped OP out. Our next story is by Adam Jadam, Little to No Regret. So I was recently, about 6 months ago, hired by a big company to do IT. During one of the training sessions, we were told to do 10 to 25 tickets a day. Tickets took a maximum of 3 minutes to answer if it was an easy case, as most of us had replies written up that we used over and over. So one day I did 31, another day when I was being lazy, I still did 27. Boss's supervisor was thrilled with me. One of my higher-ups was not. I was clearly making her look bad because, like I said, minimum per day was 10, and she's a skater. So she decided to spend all the free time she clearly had combing through my replies to tickets with a fine-toothed comb, tearing apart every word in reply as much as she could. 2 days after I was told my work was great, I was informed that all the work had to be submitted to a higher-up and approved before being sent in. I was like, what the freak? 2 days ago you said all was well. But I just smiled, said no problem, and then was handed a printed out Excel spreadsheet by a pissed, lazy higher-up detailing her shredding work. 3 minutes into reading, I decided to go hunting. None of her responses were bad, all she did was reword things, some of which I didn't even write as I had used replies that my trainer had been using for years. So I had asked at some point how to know how many tickets I do, and boss's boss had sent me a link into her account where not only could I see what cases I had done, but everyone's cases. That's when I discovered why lazy higher-up hated me. I was putting her at risk of being fired by running circles around her. So since lazy worker had been there longer, of course she was listened to. After a heated senior staff meeting, boss's boss took all us newbies aside and said we all had to get our work approved by a higher-up before sending it out. Now, I had shared a lot of my shortcuts with my coworkers, so we were all doing more work than our superiors got done. That must mean we're badly trained, right? Well, let me tell you the stupidity of that instruction. You see, I worked Tier 1, so anything I didn't know, I was already asking people about, as were my coworkers down on Tier 1. But by not letting us submit anything at all, work came to a more or less standstill, with our higher-ups running ragged, going back and forth, proofreading all our tickets before we could send them. This meant that they couldn't get any of their own work done until after all us temps left for the day, which meant our already painfully slow ticket response time was 10 times slower, with us noobs only able to submit 5 to 10 a day instead of the 20 to 30 we were doing just a day before the new absurd mandate. And the upper levels had no time to do tickets of their own after having to approve all of ours all day, every day. It's really hard to explain how pleasing it was to watch lazy higher-up running around because, of course, we all asked for her feedback, since she clearly didn't agree with her fellow upper-tier people's emails that we had to work with. So she and she alone could truly tell us how to word things, right? After all, I had a printed Excel sheet, page after page after page of her tearing apart the replies her coworkers at her level had been using. And all our jobs were on the line over this, as we needed to show immediate improvement. This lasted a whopping 3 days before we were all fired. That's right, fired, because if the managers had to read and approve our responses, clearly we were not cut out for the job. You told us to get them approved, remember? But honestly, I don't care. It was the most entertaining 3 days I ever spent in tech support. I do feel a little bad for lazy workers' coworkers, who were also worked to the bone doing our jobs as well as theirs, but since none of them spoke in our defense, clearly my sympathy for their plight is limited. I mean, one thing's for sure, they know what to do when they start getting showed up. A new wave of people came in and they just started dominating. And what did this lazy worker do? They said, no, we gotta find a way to sabotage these people. I can't afford to lose my cushy job where I browse Reddit all day. And frankly, they got the job done. And our final story of the day is by Dirty Pen Pal Doug. Okay, I'll do as scheduled. So where I work, we have different job flows. So in our department, we have different kinds of work that needs processing. And so we go into different projects to await for the system to send us work. Now, about 6 months ago, they changed all the projects around. So we no longer have work going to certain projects. They're just dead space. So today I was assigned one of those dead space projects. Normally I contact my manager and they fix it. However, my manager is ooh, and her manager is ooh. So everyone's gone save we get up the ladder. So I ask them, hi, I'm assigned a project, so what do you want me to work on? The response was, why are you bothering me? Contact your direct manager. Okay, that's a spiteful response. So I informed them that those managers are out of the office. So what project does she want me to do? They say, the one you are assigned. So I inform her there's no work in that project. And she replied, do you talk back to your manager that way? If you're scheduled to work that project, you do that project. I don't want to hear any more about it. Okay then, I've done nothing today but read my book, Reddit, work on my aquariums, because I'm in that project and, oddly, no work comes to me. Oh well, not my problem. I'm working that project, there's just no work. If you got yelled at and reprimanded for not just sitting around and not doing work, I would literally say, you know what, you're right, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go do my work. Turn around, walk out of there, and just find a way to kill the time while getting paid for it. Sounds pretty good to me, but with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.